to. All right. So I'm seeing a lot of no's in the chat, which that is helpful to know. I'm glad that we asked this question so that we can be really clear and on the same page. So with that, Ching, can you move us to the next slide? Okay, so last week, SDOT staff and myself were able to have a conversation to try to map out what the level or detail of recommendations for the final report. And so it was good to get staff on the same page as well. And so what folks came up with is that when we think about what we're going to be putting in the final report, staff suggested one, feedback on this overall process of community engagement and bringing in folks such as yourself and doing community outreach to work towards creating recommendations. So feedback on the overall process and what people would like Parks and Recreation to do for the next phase. So suggestions for them as they're kind of the next agency that's going to be taking on the next round of this work in collaboration with SDOT, but kind of leading it, how you saw the staff on this project. Some high level recommendations, and I'll call on, I see Adonis's hand is up, but I'll have him kind of speak to that a little bit. And then lastly, at the next meeting and the conversations that you all have, Belen, who's the project manager and also planner who's on this project, she's going to be listening to y'all's conversations around how you feel about the survey data and what this could mean for potential designs, and be able to kind of draft up some high level designs for you all to react to. And these designs that you would be reacting to would not be like, these are the end all be all of what Lake Washington Boulevard should be, but would be kind of passed off to Parks and Recreation on the next phase of this work to explore as potential options. So these are the recommendations and the detail of recommendations that we are proposing. And Adonis, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I just want to clarify too, Parks and Rec did receive money from the council member for whatever comes out of this process, but don't feel like you're limited to just Parks and Recreation. It could be City of Seattle, SDOT, whoever. So don't think about it, just to clarify that it's not just Parks and Recreation. You know, there's SDOT has right of way, or there's just something the city, you know, City of Seattle you want to do. So I want to just clarify that it's not just Parks and Recreation that you are making recommendations to on what the next steps are. So I just want to make that clear.
All right. And then also, I think Adonis, you explained it the best when we had our meeting, but the idea around high level recommendations, can you explain to folks a little bit about how you had worded that in our meeting?
Yeah. So when you think about high level recommendations, and when we get there to the point where you are making recommendations, these can be as detailed as you want. But they can also just be high level too, that the city should not do this. The city should consider this. I can put so sort of like the Rainier Beach action plan in the chat, a link to that. And what you'll see in there, it's sort of like things to be considered as you move to the next phase of whatever the process is. So there are just some considerations. They're not actual civil changes or any kind of concept. It's just things that the city needs to consider, or the things the city needs to prioritize moving into the next phase of this process. And this is all based on the conversations you have, based on what the data says and how you interpret the data. So I want you to be clear about that too. So it's not all about like the city should do X, Y, and Z in these hard hardscape changes to the road, but more like the city should consider this population even further in the next phase, or the city should think about incorporating these things into the next phase. I know I'm being pretty vague about it because I don't want to say anything that would sort of steer people in one way or another. But these can be pretty much, what you feel you would like the city to consider. So don't think it's just a civil change. And by civil change, I mean a change to the road, or a change to the sidewalk, or a change to the lakefront. And I'll put that link in the chat right now.
Yeah, thank you, Adonis. And then also, if you could just maybe give us like a 30-second like condensed overview of what the next phase of this project will look like.
So the next phase, typically, like we're in the planning phase now on most of our typical projects we do at SDOT, we're more or less at the visioning part. There could be a planning phase that comes next, and then a design phase. And then after design, usually after design, there's implementation or construction. So consider us in the planning phase, where we're getting the big ideas, the big concepts, the things for people to consider before the designers go in and actually start designing something real. I hope that makes sense. And then based on whatever is designed that's real, and there's an outreach component to that piece too, then based on that, there is construction of whatever is designed. So we're quite a ways away from something being built.
Perfect. Thank you, Adonis. And then there's a couple of questions. So we're going to give about 3 minutes for questions. We can keep us on time. First one I see in the chat from Terry, please explain bullet point number 3. I'm happy to explain that, or Adonis, if you'd like to, feel free to jump in. Oh, okay. I can kick us off, and if there's anything you want to add. So essentially, again, as Adonis kind of explained around these phases, that we want to make sure that there's enough flexibility and that recommendations are high level, so that the next phase of outreach, things are not going to be like pre-scripted, but there's still space for community to be a part of molding this. And so potential design concepts would be just kind of like some high level changes or aspects to Lake Washington Boulevard and the sidewalks based off of kind of the conversations that Belen will be listening to of you all and the data, but just some very kind of like high level designs that could potentially be explored in the next phase of this work. But they will not be, I just want to make the distinction that it's not that like the next phase has to be like completely committed to them, want to leave room for flexibility, but to kind of start Parks and Rec off, and the next group of community and folks who are engaging off with a little bit of like ideas of what came out of this process. And then Adonis, if you wanted to say anything else to that. Adonis or Ching.
Yeah, not much else on bullet point 3. I think this was something that Belen had thought about, and she can't be here today. She had a personal matter to deal with. So I think where Belen is coming from is, and some of you have touched on this already, is just sort of what are the constraints of Lake Washington Boulevard. So if you are making recommendations, if you happen to be making recommendations on some, changes to the road, or changes to the sidewalk, or changes to the beachfront, there are just some things to be considered in terms of right-of-way, various things like that, which kind of which should be considered. I can't really speak to it. This is sort of Belen's point here, and she's not here. So I think that's the best way to describe it.
Great, thank you. And then Yuan, I saw that your hand was up.
Can I just clarify? It sounds like there's going to be another round of outreach after this committee concludes. So there will be another round of outreach after after this, and then design will happen?
Uh,
Or is that another round of outreach part of the design phase?
there you go.
Okay, so after this committee concludes and we give whatever recommendations, then the design phase will happen and we can expect that to complete in, I'm assuming, however many months.
Yeah.
And
typically,
during that design phase, there will be outreach similar to what I'm assuming, kind of like the Beacon Avenue bike lanes, where there's like a design and then or a couple designs, and they'll put out a survey about it. Or like the Rainier Avenue bus lanes and they'll put out a survey about it? Or are we talking about some other kind of outreach?
you're right on. I don't know exactly what the outreach looks like what are the different tools and tactics they'll use for that next phase. But typically with SDOT projects, we start with the planning, the visioning, there's outreach around that. And then we move to a different phase, which is design. And there's quite a bit of outreach around design. And you're right on, the essence of what you're saying is absolutely correct. There may be 3 different options for folks to explore. And then here's the trade-offs of all those different options. Those options are based on what we heard in the planning phase. And then folks will have lots of opportunity to engage on those things. And yes, it may be a survey, open houses. There'll be lots of outreach and engagement all along the way, all the way up through construction. Or if there is construction, yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Wonderful. And it looks like we have just one last question from Teresa in the chat. Is there any recourse if we don't agree with the final recommendations, kind of like no agreement on the type of holiday drink? So definitely SDOT staff, correct me if I'm wrong, but we do need to come to an agreement. We do need to provide recommendations. And so I'm going to put into the chat the 3 long-term visions that this group created for this project and this process. And essentially, we want to use these as our North Stars and kind of almost like the tiebreaker when we think about where folks may be rubbing up against with disagreement on recommendations, that if we want to be able to articulate how recommendations are coming back to one or multiple of these long-term visions that you all made. And so I do believe we need to come out of this process with some recommendations. And Adonis, is that a new hand raised?
Yeah, it's a new hand raised. I think, Teresa, whatever recommendations we make, that you all make, not me, it's just the difference between where we're not trying to go is a this, not that, but a this and that. So it's that and it's not this, not that. So I think there's lots of room for agreement here. Depending on when you get to that phase, obviously we will be looking at the data in a little bit for folks to see what folks said. So I don't want you to think about it as it's black and white, this and that. And then also going back to the bullet point number 2, there can be a recommendation of one thing, but also considerations to be considered going forward into the design. So I know it's a big kind of like ambiguous thing to think about right now, but you really do have a lot of freedom here to make recommendations, and there's a lot of room for agreement. So don't think of it as a or situation, but an and situation. I hope that makes sense.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was on mute. Let's go Ching and then Teresa, and then just want us to be mindful on time as well.
Thank you. And I agree with what Adonis just said. I think to add a little bit more to that, I think if we come to a point where we cannot agree on something, I think that's a good opportunity for us to include that as a recommendation that the next phase, we should do more outreach in that area to get more community feedback and input. I think that it doesn't have to be one or the other, like what Adonis had said. I think it can be both, right? Where it's allowed. And I think this is not at the end of this phase. It's not the end of outreach. So I think there's definitely room for more outreach to be done in the next phase as well. And to be, there are lessons learned from this process, and I think that should be included in the recommendations for next phase. With that, I pass my word to Teresa.
Thank you to both of you guys, because it made sense. And I'm kind of concerned, like, when it goes to the next phase and we're not all included, is there a way that we can recommend that we be brought into the next phase, or sometimes, or some way our voices be included since we've gone through the first round? Because the next group could, I'm just afraid that our recommendation could be ignored or looked over based on how the next phase is handled. And maybe not, but I'm just wondering if there's any way that we could be included some kind of way in the next phases.
Absolutely. If that is something you all want to recommend, I can't guarantee that there will be, any type of compensation or a task force will be formed. But if that is a recommendation that you all make, that for the next design phase, that there is a task force formed and X number of original task force members are included, you are free to make that recommendation.
Thank you.
All right, wonderful. And then just quickly in the chat, I see Clara with the question related to Teresa's. Do we have an established way to make final decisions or have final approval on those recommendations? So the next these meetings are going to build off of each other to get us to the point of recommendations. And we're going to use the long-term visions that you all created as the litmus test of what goes into the final report or not. And so we basically are going to really need to be able to articulate how the recommendations are getting to one or all of the long-term visions, but not canceling another one out, if that makes sense. So we're going to do some activities in the next 2 meetings to get us there. And then I also see Zachary asked about the Mount Baker Beach House project or boathouse project. If someone could follow up with Zachary over email with the answer to that question, that'd be great. And then thank you, Jennifer, for your suggestion. I'm going to be saving tonight's chat, so that could definitely be something that we bring up at another meeting to see if y'all want to add that to the high level recommendations. All right, perfect. Okay, so we are going to move forward now to look at the data. So Ching, if you want to switch us over to the other PowerPoint, we'll start the process of going through that.
All right, it's going to take me a minute. Bear with me.
Please. We'll just give Ching a little bit of time as she does the work of switching us over to the next slides. And so just to kind of give you all an overview, so we're going to look at this data and we're going to take some time to review it, and then we're going to have a few questions that will help be a part of our discussion. And one of the things that staff and I spoke about at our last meeting is that, of course, as these meetings are recorded, that y'all's discussions are going to be a part of the final report as well. And us documenting that in these conversations and the highlights from them, we want to make that as a part of the final report. So again, each of these meetings are going to be building on itself or on each meeting, and the discussions are also a part of what's going into the final report. All right. Okay. So some high level information about the survey. So the survey numbers, of course, we closed it on November 30th. We received 3,158 online survey responses since its launch on October 19th. There was a total of 191 intercept surveys from the pop-up event. So shout out team for collecting those. And those different events were Boo Bash, tabling at QFC, the Safeway on Andover, and also Columbia City Farmer Market, and then I believe the Rainier Avenue Safeway as well. So that's a lot of conversations that you all had with folks. And while that data has not been kind of put together and packaged yet, the intercept surveys, that's part of what's being worked on, as well as those qualitative questions that were on the Survey Monkey survey. So very exciting. And for some of you who were at a different meeting, I was like, go team, go us, because we did beat the Aurora corduroy survey respondents. So that is exciting. Yes, so there were 3,158 online surveys completed. Wonderful. We'll go to the next slide. Okay, taking a deeper look into it. Go again. Oh, that must be a holdover slide. We'll keep going. Okay, so the first question, how do you currently use Lake Washington Boulevard? Please select all that apply. So when we look at this data, we can see from the survey results that some of those top responses were walking, access to the parks, lake, and open space recreation. So for walking, that came in at 69.2%. Access to the parks, lake, and recreation spaces, 76.91%. And then we had biking at 67.4%, and then driving at 66%. And then not as many around folks using mobility aids. That's at about 1.6%. And then all of the above 2%, a little over 2%, and none of the above 0.48%. All right, so we'll move perfect to, so we're skipping ahead because questions 2 and 3 were the qualitative questions. So the next one that we have here is, do you use Lake Washington Boulevard as your main route for getting to work, home, or other activities? If so, how? So the majority of folks here said, I do not use Lake Washington Boulevard as my main commuting. That was at 51%. The next answer was driving at 30.95%. And then we had biking at 15.36%. And then lastly, walking at 2.39%, and then using mobility aid at 0.07%. So you have this pie chart here, and then the actual number, percentages, and numbers as well. Okay. Question 5, why do you use Lake Washington Boulevard for getting around South Seattle? So for this question, it was one of those strongly agree, somewhat agree, and somewhat disagree or strongly disagree. And so with that, the questions were, we asked folks if it's because it feels safe and accessible, is it because of congestion and other issues on nearby roads, is it a direct route to my home or place of work, because of the park aesthetic and therapeutic purposes, and then other reasons. So for strongly agree, the highest number of responses came at for the park aesthetic and therapeutic purposes. Then followed by congestion and other issues on nearby roads. And then right under that, it is a direct route to my home and or place of business. And then we also had it feels safe and accessible. And so if we're looking at the strongly agrees, that's how those played out. If we're looking at the strongly disagree, we saw the highest numbers for that on the question around it is a direct route to my home and or place of business. And then right after that, congestion and other issues on nearby roads. And then lastly, it feels safe and accessible. Take a moment to look at that. Perfect. The next question. So we have the question here, why do you use Lake Washington Boulevard? Oh, again, that one. Just kind of breaking those down for folks with the numbers, if the bar graph, kind of showing y'all what was on the bar graph, but with numbers. So again, that's the strongest, the strongly agree, the highest numbers for that were in the congestion and other issues on nearby roads. Okay, Aaron's saying we should look at both strongly and somewhat agree as an aggregate to get a good idea of what respondents think about a given issue. All right. Okay. So still, when we're looking at those numbers, we'll put those two columns next together. And we can do the same for somewhat disagree and strongly disagree as well. And then these folks in the middle are kind of our buffers. But if we're looking at it like that, then for it feels safe and accessible, with both of those, we're looking at about 59% of folks selecting that as what they agree around it feels safe and accessible. When we're looking at congestion and other issues on nearby roads, we are coming in at 40% of folks responding to that. Yuan said, is there a reason there are so many people who answered the survey and didn't answer these questions? You know, it is hard to say when each question wasn't required. And perhaps we can actually put that into those considerations, is that if there's going to be future surveys, there'd be a way to get at that. We can also jot this down as a question. I know, Ching, you were saying that there are a few folks at SDOT. Who are your folks who do your surveys? And so we could ask this around what their take is around such a small number of folks. Okay, and then also, Yuan, just make sure I'm answering your question right as well. I'm seeing, okay, you said, I don't think, okay. You're saying nearly 10% of people who answered online surveys didn't answer these questions. Where are you getting that from?
Hi, I'm getting that through, we received 3,158 survey responses online.
Mm-hmm.
And then the total number are like around 2,700, 2,800
Oh,
And
okay.
so, yeah, so we're looking at around 300, actually more than 300 people generally who responded to the survey but didn't answer these questions. I think that it's not necessary to require answers to these questions, but I think it is important to figure out why, or at least we don't have to figure out why, but I think it's important to at least consider or look into why certain people might not answer some questions. Like I said, I think I mentioned in the chat, I do work with data in my day job, and especially I work at a low-income clinic, and figuring out why some people respond to questions or why certain populations have missing data is very important when we consider bias in our processes. So it's just something that I wanted to point out because it is actually a very large number. 10% is nothing to ignore. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, let's definitely make a note of that as a part of what could potentially go into the considerations. All right, y'all. Let's move on to the next question. Okay, so this question, the question around collisions. So since January 2015, there have been about 100 reported collisions between people driving and people biking along Lake Washington Boulevard. Below are some tactics within SDOT's toolkit. Which of the following tactics do you feel the city can employ to reduce the number of collisions? Choose your top 3. If you have ideas that are not listed below, please include your response in the comment box provided by question 3. So this was a ranking order for this question, with green being number 1 choice, blue number 2, and yellow number 3 as their third pick for the option. And so when we're looking at number 1, it says that's the answer around providing dedicated space along Lake Washington Boulevard. After that, and we can do the thing where we look at like 1 and 2 together, but as you can see, that was kind of coming in first for that answer. And then second was actually do nothing. For folks' top choice. And then third, increase the number of, actually, if we could go to the next slide where those are written out a little bit more. And Yuan, you're asking, are we capable of using ranked choice to pick the top 3? So again, we're not going to get into like hard recommendations today, just looking at the data. And then we'll have some activities at the next meeting to kind of go through this. All right, so okay, if we're looking at folks' number 1s, that number 2 around increase the number of days, weekends, and or seasons. The road is temporarily closed to cars and open to people that ride bikes, walk, and use mobility. And currently the road is only closed on certain weekends in the spring and summer as part of bicycle weekends. Oh, okay, I see what you're saying, Yuan. You know, if it's anything that we have to like manipulate the Survey Monkey tool, I'm not sure if we have access to that at the moment.
Are we capable of obtaining the raw data?
Yes, we are. Belen has been the person who's been supporting with that, but with her not here today, if you want to put your suggestions in the chat, we can work to get it organized for the next meeting.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, great. All right. Yes, do nothing definitely scored higher, probably than folks thought. And then kind of our when it came to the third choice, the selection that had the highest there was add more stop signs along the boulevard as folks' third choice. And then that was followed by refresh the paint on the ground to better distinguish traffic lanes and crosswalks. Okay, so we'll move to the next.
Jackie,
Oh,
quick question. The weighted average on those, I mean, that gives us a really good idea of, when we're talking about three top choices, the overall most weighted choices, the ones that they thought were the best ideas, there for overall changes. I didn't expect that either, but it was pretty clear. People were talking about, even though it was mostly just a third choice, just the reducing the speed limit. I was surprised by that too.
thank you, thank you. And definitely keep that in your back pocket because we're actually gonna ask y'all some of your thoughts. So definitely, if you're able to take some notes as we go through this. I know we did not send this out in before the meeting, and that was intentional. So if you want to just kind of jot down some of your thoughts as we go through this, that will be helpful. Okay. A lot of questions coming into the chat. So Clara said, to be clear, the previous graph doesn't illustrate the people who didn't select each category as one of their top 3 choices. So this chart with numbers is more accurate. The previous graph doesn't. When you say like as if they skipped over it, can you explain a little bit what you're asking there, Clara?
I was just looking at the previous slide. I mean, I was thinking about the previous slide, and it, like, each one adds up to 100. So this is like of people who chose that response as one of their top 3, what percentage of them answered first, second, or third? But there's not like a color for like didn't select this as their top 3.
Oh, I see. If they skip, I can't remember how the question was structured on the Survey Monkey. If it,
I can speak to that a little bit. I think you're right, Clara, that is the case. And I think because we want to ensure we are able to share some of the data with the task force at tonight's meeting, this is really a quick and dirty version of that. We're going to try to clean this up and work with our internal folks a little bit on graphic design and data analysts to see how we can make the graphics for the results, for the quantitative results anyway, a little bit easier to understand and read before we send those out to the task force. And so that's a very good recommendation for us, not for the project, but for the data, for us to clean it up. So if you don't mind, for folks who have similar thoughts or questions or concerns, please feel free to send those to us via email within sometime this week, I think. Then that way we can work on cleaning this up before we can get this out the door to send over to you all. Thank you. I'll pass it back to Jackie.
okay, perfect. So let's go to the next question. Okay, so question 7, Seattle Parks and Recreation currently operates the bicycle weekends, which closes Lake Washington Boulevard to motorized vehicles on select weekends and during the summer. Going forward, how would you like to see this program operate? So the majority of folks responded, expand the program to additional weekends, holiday seasons, etc. Next was go back to summer bicycle Sundays only, and then continue summer bicycle weekends, Friday evenings through Monday. And we can go to the next slide, I believe, which will show the numbers around that. Okay. Great. Okay, let's go to the next question. Okay, so how can the city better serve people with disabilities, pedestrians, and others that walk and use mobility along Lake Washington Boulevard? Choose your top three. Coming in, ooh, they're so close together. Okay. If we could maybe move to the numbers for this one, since they're pretty close. Okay, so for the number one choice, we had increased the number of days, weekends, or seasons the road is temporarily closed to cars and open to people that ride bikes, walk, and use mobility aid. And currently and again, seeing what days that's closed, but that was 55% of folks who responded to that as the way to better serve folks with disabilities or folks who use mobility aids along the boulevard. And then the second one was to provide more sidewalks and wider walking paths. And then the third kind of top for the number one was looking at do nothing because I do not see any issues with the boulevard as it currently is. And one of the things that I know we mentioned when we were looking at this is that kind of just looking at this, it does feel like there were probably a lot of folks who answered this question who they themselves do not identify as disabled, or folks who use mobility aids along Lake Washington Boulevard. Actually, Teresa, there was on the first question, I can't remember the exact number of folks who said they use mobility aids. Let me pull it up right quick.
I think there were two.
Oh no, there was 52.
Oh, 52, never mind.
Yeah. Perfect. Great. Okay. And Anna put into the chat, this is what happens when you ask people without lived experience to speak for people to have that experience. So I think that is definitely something to keep in consideration when looking at the answers to these questions. And then Jennifer, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not a data person, so I'm a little bit confused. When it says 26.20% under the first line for number one, and it says 186 people, does that mean of the 710 people that chose that one, 26.2% of them put that as their first choice? So it's not 26.2% of all of the respondents. It's just that line, correct? I'm embarrassed to say that I cannot do the math of 186 and 710. So it looks like that's the case. And I see that Joanna's nodding. So great. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Sorry, I was just running the numbers really quickly. Great. Yes. Okay. See a few things in the chat. Yes. Okay. Definitely comments are coming in the chat. And again, some of these comments that I'm seeing could also be things that would go as considerations into the final report. Okay, next question. Okay, Lake Washington Boulevard connects to numerous parks and open spaces that are well used by the public. On a scale of 1 to 10, do you feel the city should continue to invest and improve the park experience with improved walking paths, trails, picnic tables, more trees, etc.? And so the average response to that on that scale of 1 to 10 was 9. And Ching, I can't remember if it was like said like, oh, 0 is this, 10 is that.
Oh, sorry. I think 10 is agree, like
Okay,
strongly agree, and then 0 is strongly disagree.
okay,
Thank you.
all right. Great. Okay. All right, let's move to the next question. Okay, so now we're jumping into the demographic questions of who answered the responses or the survey. So when we're looking at gender, which gender do you most identify? Female came in at 50%, then male at 44%, and then transgender 0.56%, two-spirit 0.65%, non-binary or non-conforming 2.45%, and then other 0.77%. All right, we'll move to the next question. And then when looking at the question around race, how would you describe your race? Please select all that apply. Definitely, if we could maybe move to the numbers part of this, if we have that option. Okay, perfect. Okay, so majority of folks who took the survey were white at 79.49%. Then next, we had Asian or Asian American at 9.68%. Black or African American, 7.1%, and then Hispanic or Latinos, 4%, Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, 0.8%, and then other at 5%. Okay. And then we wanted to also get you all some of the numbers of just the area as well. We had already at the beginning of this process ran the demographics of this area. And so here y'all will see on your screen like what the actual numbers look like for, I believe this is, it says census tract data for Mount Baker, Genesee Park, and Seward Park. Okay. Definitely a lot of things in the chat. We will be for sure save this chat today. So if there are things that are coming to mind. All right, we want to move to the next question. Okay, so when looking at the neighborhoods that folks live in who responded to this, we see Mount Baker kind of at the top there, Seward Park, Columbia City, Lakewood, Central District, and then Beacon Hill and Rainier Beach. And then you can see the pie gets smaller with different neighborhoods, but less shy. I think ones that, if we're looking at places that are adjacent to Lake Washington Boulevard, we see less shy up there, Hillman City and Madrona as well. And so if we go to the next slide, we can look at those numbers too. Perfect. Okay, so yeah, you can see there about 13 or almost 14% of folks who responded to the survey were from Mount Baker, then almost another 12% from Seward Park, a little over 9% from Columbia City, and a little over 7% from Lakewood. And the list goes on. Okay. And then when looking at age, the highest percentage of folks who took this survey were 60 or above. Then coming in right after that was 31 to 39 age range. And then we also have 40 to 49 age range, and then 50 to 59 as the age range. So definitely not as many folks in the youth, kind of like that 30 and under. Definitely we can see here that folks who were 60 or over responded the most. Okay. And then just the question around how did you hear about this survey? So a lot of folks actually heard through word of mouth. So friends or family members, and then after that, social media, and then local organizations. So definitely y'all give yourself a huge shout out, because it sounded like community outreach is really how folks heard about this survey. Okay. Perfect. So a lot of great things in the chat that I think will actually move us to the next part is that we want to kind of collect some initial kind of feelings and reactions from folks. And then from there, what we'll be able to do is kind of make those avatars, our profiles, or basically how we want to cross tab this data in the SurveyMonkey to kind of hear more specifically the answers to the survey based on the type of person who took the survey. All right. Adonis, I see your hand is up.
I do appreciate the conversation and the suggestions. I just want to acknowledge that I appreciate the conversation and the suggestions folks have made about the survey data and some of the observations they made. One that particularly caught my attention was just because one survey answer said 53%, I don't know what the number was, but was, kind of the one that was the highest. That only means that of the people that took that, 53% of those people said that that was the highest. And so I appreciate what Aaron said. There's the weighted averages as well, the weighted response to those questions. So that is something to think about moving forward with the survey data and how it's presented and how it's talked about. I just want to acknowledge that I heard that we heard that.
Okay, yes. And again, lots of great things in the chat that we're going to be saving and we can bring into our discussion at the next meeting, or there will be a few questions that are about to come up. So one, I'm going to drop, and Ching, you can stop sharing your screen. Thank you so much for going through the slides for us. All right. Perfect. So yeah, whenever you're ready, you can just take those slides off, and I'm going to put 2 questions into the chat. And so here in the chat, you have, I want you, if you have a piece of paper or a way to just kind of think about your thoughts to this, but 2 to 4 aspects about the data that surprised you and 2 to 4 aspects about the data that did not surprise you. So take a moment to think about that. And then I'm going to put the speaking order in the chat, and we're going to go around and answer these questions. So give folks a little bit to collect your thoughts. And Ching, if you're able to, if you want to stop sharing your screen.
Sorry, I don't actually know how to stop.
Oh, okay, no problem.
Thank you.
No problem. Great. That way we can all see each other, whoever's on screen. Okay. And again, folks did put things in the chat, so we'll be saving that as well. But Jennifer, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. I'm not great at like taking in that much information, but it was really interesting. So I'll just kind of say a couple things if that's okay. The thing that surprised me is the percentage of people, and I understand that we need to like look closely at that data exactly, but that didn't think anything needed to be done. That kind of flabbergasts me. Interesting. And then the thing that didn't surprise me was the sort of distribution of answers around continuing the bicycle Sundays. That's kind of where I thought that would fall. That's not very, I can't even think of the word, like not very in depth, but that's basically what I can say. Short notice.
Thank you. And we can, we'll definitely follow up with kind of a little online survey on these questions, but definitely want to get folks' initial reaction. So thank you. The next person in the speaking order is Terry.
Yeah, hi. That is a lot to take in. I guess, well, one of the things that just is part of the discussion, Anna had a good chat comment, which was there was a question related to disabled people and how this would affect them. And I think since virtually nobody shares that experience, I think part of my process should be looking at the survey and deciding if there's actually some questions where the answers are not useful or just don't come from. I think we can conclude as a group that you throw out certain questions if they just aren't ended up without particularly valid data to support them. I think the do nothing, I agree with Jennifer, the do nothing responses surprised me a bit in terms of, I think that it was a default answer to people who don't want to do anything. It's a fairly high percentage. And certainly I think in a lot of these processes, you see people needing to say, just vote no somehow. And that was the way that got answered. I am disappointed that people aren't looking at the more creative potential of this. The not surprise for me was that due to the popularity of expanded COVID and other closures, that a high percentage of people were in support of that. So those are my main takeaways. I'll let me give it to other people to talk about because there's other things I could say about.
Thank you, Terry. The next person is Yuan.
Something that didn't surprise me was the answer to, hang on, I had it up. Whether or not they think the city should continue spending money on or continue investing on improving the park experience. I think I mentioned this in the chat that we should graph it as a histogram, but I think that of course people want to better our park experience no matter where. I have a really hard time with this data because there's a lot that is here on the surface but needs to be dug underneath. I think that this kind of data, especially with the demographics as put, is really difficult to draw any kind of conclusions from, because you kind of have to like dig in and say, of the people that said that they use Lake Washington Boulevard for walking, what did they say? Of the people that said that they use Lake Washington Boulevard for driving, what did they say? It was really interesting to me that half of the respondents said that they don't use Lake Washington Boulevard as their main commuting route, which suggests that they use it for everything else. And I would love to see what either of those folks really say about how they use the road, or how they want to see it improve in safety or not improve in safety. Because it also suggests that half of the people that answer the survey do use it as their main commuting route. And I think that's interesting too. I think that we, like I said earlier, I think we need to dig into what kind of data is missing. I was looking at the demographic data as a whole. I think for all the questions for which y'all provided numbers, I think the highest number of people that responded with any kind of demographic data was around 2,400. While I do think that since demographic data wasn't required, a lot of people probably saw that screen and was like, this isn't important. Next. But I think that is something that might make weighing the data a little complicated. But yeah, I think just in terms of raw numbers, I think that this is difficult to draw conclusions from. I think that we need to be wary of drawing conclusions from this kind of data when it's just like high level like this. And I also think that with the top 3, it's going to be really, really important to sort of rank choice it so that we can see exactly, like, have a better representation of what people are saying. Because if someone says that if someone is writing, let's say that they want to provide loading zones for accessible bus services like the Access Bus, which is the lowest choice for number 1. What did they in particular put for top 2? And since that seems to be like an accessibility issue, then we also want to frame it in terms of all the other answers that were given. So I guess it's not really a question of what is surprising, what is not. Sorry. And I went on for a long time. So you can go to the next person.
Thank you. And then Donna's put a note there in the chat, and also saying part of your answer is actually going to get us to our second question that we have around the digging deeper. So perfect. Next person on the list is Aaron.
Hey, sorry about the dog in the background. Actually, did somebody else already mention this? But one thing that I thought that was surprising was the percentage of do nothing, and I totally see your response in the chat there, Yuan, and it makes perfect sense that you only had 328. You got to look at that data to see what the actual numbers are versus just the percentages. So it totally bases off of those people that actually responded to it, those respondents. But still, even among those people that did respond to it, I thought it was kind of strange to see that as a high ranking high ranking percentage. It didn't surprise me that a huge number of the people that responded to this were white. It's not, I mean, it's not just demographic, it's approachability. And I can see how people of color and especially I didn't know if you noticed this as well, but the gender identification, there was a lot of people that actually didn't even answer that. So, I mean, between the different demographics, I can absolutely see why, it's we're trying to avoid it, but it's out there, and it's just the way that these things go, and I don't like it. But I can see why it happened that way. The only other part about that I really was that didn't surprise me was the alternate routes to main arterials, using Lake Washington Boulevard for that, because I do it myself. Thank you. And
Looks like Zachary is next.
Zachary, I was just gonna say.
All right.
Zachary.
And so I like to process information. I don't think that showing the highlights necessarily gives me an opportunity to process it before I say what I'm excited or surprised by or not surprised by. So I don't really have much to say initially. I guess I was disappointed to see that while the census tracts only have 50% of those areas being Caucasian, that the 70+% of respondents were survey takers were Caucasian. Other than that, I guess I'm a little surprised that we have a survey about these issues, which in my opinion is going to most likely be responded to by people excited about changing Lake Washington Boulevard, and then to see a significant amount, and I don't know yet how to interpret it, of the people that felt strongly enough to respond to a survey to say the status quo is perfectly fine, if that makes sense. But I haven't been able to get into the data, so I can't say that I'm surprised by anything yet, but maybe once I get the opportunity to review it more, I'll have some better thoughts. And then quickly, it does look like from the data that we're headed towards some sort of eggnog and spiced caramel apple type resolution, as opposed to clearly everyone wanting eggnog.
All right, thanks, Zachary. Patricia.
Let's see. I was not surprised by the number of people who didn't want to do anything, because, and this is what a lot of the comments that we've gotten, I have about probably 300 comments to categorize that we've gotten through Friends of Stewart Park and next door. But I think so many people were so happy for so long with, well, Bicycle Sundays and now extended to bicycle weekends, that it doesn't surprise me. The thing that did surprise me a little was there was the discrepancy between the census information, which it varies slightly as you come north, but for 98118, according to the 2020 census, about 2% of people commute by bicycle for work. So it did surprise me how many people indicated that they're commuting by bicycle to work. I thought it would be much more disproportionate than that. I think it was, I'm trying to remember if the numbers seemed like they were close to the number of drivers, which seemed odd to me. But I just think there's an awful lot of folks out there who do use it for all kinds of reasons, and have been happy with the status quo. So that did not surprise me.
All right, thank you, Patricia. Let's see, the next person that we have is Anna.
Yeah, this is Anna. I guess what did not surprise me, while there was, a pretty significant chunks of folks responding from, the Mount Baker and immediate areas, I was excited to see that there were folks from all over the city responding, because I think it really does show how Lake Washington Boulevard is a regional resource as a green space and an outdoor space for people to use. And so I think that was not surprising to me. And I hope that we have a conversation around, I know there was earlier discussion about weighting or not weighting, or how to weight geography. And I think that's really important, because I do think recognizing that this is, a very special resource that doesn't exist most places in our city or our region is important, and that it has a draw to people for recreation. And then I guess the other piece, and you saw my comment in the chat around access, but I think it's just not, why ask people who don't have lived experience of an access need to speculate about what other people need? I think that's silly. And you saw there, how people responded to that. So I would really be curious if there's enough data to dig down around people who who can't currently access the park or struggle to access this, what their perception of what needs to happen is, because I think it's pretty different. And then finally, I think overall with this survey and my whole frustration with this process is that for me, it matters much less what people currently what the status quo currently is and what people for whom the status quo works are comfortable with. I mean, I see this at the state level in transportation conversations all the time. It's like, for most folks, our state highway system is working pretty well. And they're not the people who are going to be like, let's, change everything because it can work. But for people who it's not working, those are the folks who are going to be loud and engaged. And I actually think that just doing these sort of like majority vote type polls or even, weighted in some way doesn't get to a vision for what we want. And if as a city, we want a Lake Washington Boulevard that's accessible, then we can just do that. And it doesn't matter if a majority of folks want there to be sidewalk access or not. Like, the city and our leadership can decide that that is an important value. If the city and the leadership decide, for climate and public health and environmental justice reasons that we need to reduce the number of single occupancy vehicles in the city, then they can decide to do things to make it easier for people who are biking and rolling and riding transit to connect. And so I think I honestly don't care what a majority of people who are mostly over 60 think about what the city should look like. So I don't feel like the survey is worth engaging with deeply going forward.
All right. I'm going to pass it over to Clara.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, similar to what other folks have said, I also kind of need more time to look at this. But one thing that really stuck out at me was the same thing that Patricia was talking about, where there were like 15% of people who respond to the survey saying that they're regular bike commuters along Lake Washington Boulevard. And I think it was something like 30% who were regular car commuters. And that's really striking to me because, like, I'm someone who would probably use Lake Washington Boulevard to commute by bike if it felt safer. But like right now, I don't bike there at all ever because I just feel like I'm going to die. And so, like, I guess I'm both surprised at how many people are using it, even though it feels like it does to be biking along there, especially during commuting hours or regular commuting hours, I guess. And also kind of like sort of excited to see that number being so high, knowing that there's probably a lot of people who are like me, who aren't regular bike commuters along Lake Washington Boulevard, but might answer that differently if it felt differently to be there. And then things that did not surprise me. Yeah, I definitely agree with Anna about the disability access question and the racial demographics also, where I'd really love to see if we can like weigh the answers or dig into like only looking at people who responded a certain way, what changes about the numbers. If we're able to like weigh the racial demographics to match the racial demographics of the neighborhood or of the larger city, or however we want to do that.
Thank you, Clara. And that's actually going to be our next question. So keep that thought. All right, Teresa, you are next.
Well, two of the questions, the one where that was weighted really highly about closing the park for the more closure, and then the one that where people said do nothing. I believe it was because the way the question was weighted, and the one where they said that they wanted closure, there were two questions that suggested closure. So of course you're going to get that kind of response. And then the one that said do nothing, there was no question there about not closing the park at all. And I think a lot of that could have went into that category because it wasn't there. And I think had that question been there, we'd have a better understanding of what people wanted. And I do feel like it's important for our leaders to listen to everyone and not just make decisions based on a few select group of people who they're around a lot. As for the disability one, I feel like there was a lot of disabled people who for whatever reason, we weren't able to reach out to. And had we been able to reach out to them, I think that the response would be a lot different based on interactions that I've had. I'm disabled and I've spoken to a lot of people and they don't walk, seniors too. So they do want to be able to access the road by motor vehicles too. So I'm trying to think of something that I mean, that's all I'll say right now.
Thank you, Teresa. And then last is Ty, and I will just say we are running up against time. And so if folks do not mind just staying 10 minutes extra, I think we can wrap up the next part. All right, Ty.
I'm trying to remember everything that was in the survey, but one thing that surprised me, I don't even remember what question, but one of the top ways to mitigate traffic was slowing down the speed limit. And that surprised me a bit. That's 25. Like speed bumps weren't mentioned, but that was a surprise for me. And then in terms of what did not surprise me was the racial makeup of the respondents. And what follows after that is how people want the park closed for bicycle Sundays or weekends. I'm done. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you, everyone. So again, all of this is going to be recorded, and we're going to be able to summarize y'all's discussions as a part of the final report. So the next question that we have, and we heard it a lot from you all already in your answer to the first question around this idea of like digging in to the data a little bit more to like look at certain types of folks and who responded, and then looking at like what those groups of people, their answers look like. And so I've just been calling this avatars because I'm not a researcher, but we'll have folks at SDOT who are going to like support with this. So just bear with me if I'm using words wrong. But thinking about the different demographics and the different folks who responded to the questions, such as those who like use it for their main commute or those who do not. We're gonna kind of create a list of that we can send to the folks who are going to be supporting with analyzing this data of who we want to like dig deeper into and start looking at these different folks, like profiles of folks who responded to the survey and how it is that they like use Lake Washington Boulevard or do not. Does that make sense to everybody? A lot of y'all kind of like mentioned these ideas when you answered the first question. So if that sounds good to folks, if you're not able to stay on for another 10 minutes, you can also answer this question over email. But if you are able to stay on, then we'll just kind of quickly go around again. And if you hear your answer repeated, please, like, just for the sake of time, add new ones, not ones that have been repeated. All right, so we'll start with Jennifer.
I am so sorry, Jackie. I was thinking about my text and I did not hear the specific question I'm answering. Can you say it again?
No worries. I mean, you kind of said it in the chat. Okay, well, a little bit, but yeah, are there specific ways you want to dig into this data more? So like whether that's like the type of person who responded to the survey or the specific answers that we saw come out of the survey, how we want to dig into those people who answered that way. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I'm sorry again. I think that yes, I would like to look into how you can segment the data so that you can understand how, if or how it's representative of the community that we were trying to capture. That makes sense. Like, I'll say that, and anybody else can expand or figure out what I meant to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. The next person that we have on our speaking order is Terry.
Yeah, I can't speak to it specifically. I'm not a data person, but I also feel that the other half of the equation, the qualitative information, is really the only way to bring this into focus. So that's that. I feel like wait for the qualitative and then figure out how to bear down on it.
All right, thank you, Terry. Yuan, I know you had mentioned a few ways, so definitely feel free to share.
Yeah. I've already mentioned quite a few. I think the demographic stuff is the most obvious, so I won't go into that again. I think in terms of the question you were talking about, in terms of avatars, I actually think that digging into why people or how people use Lake Washington Boulevard and separating it out that way is going to be important. I know that a lot of different people use it in multiple different ways, but just identifying certain groups that do use it in a certain way, they might have certain answers based on that, right? Like if you never walk, or if you never bike, or if you never drive on Lake Washington Boulevard, then you're probably going to have different answers. I mean, I don't know actually, but I think that would be important to know. Another thing that I think would be important to dig into is I was personally surprised to see how many people said that it feels safe and accessible. And I'm actually going to suggest that we de-emphasize, or we de-weigh or lower the weight of people that say that they do agree that it feels safe and accessible, simply based on the values that we ourselves have created for ourselves, the 3 values that Jackie pointed out: improve access, increase bicycle and pedestrian safety, and preserving and improving the park experience. I think that we are taking under the assumption that it is not safe. And so I think that we do need to, whomever is answering it feels safe and accessible, I'm not saying just completely throw those out, but I'm saying that we should figure out what people who disagree or strongly disagree with that answer, what they are saying. That's just off the top of my head. I would love it if we are able to get the raw data. I would love to dig into it myself. I don't know if anybody else feels the same way. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuan. And then SDOT staff, if someone is able, I know I can't speak on behalf of y'all for that. Okay, perfect. Wonderful. So then next person, Aaron.
My computer didn't want to come off of mute. All right. The space bar wasn't working. I think honestly, I think, for lack of a better term, the youth vote here was pretty slim pickings. I mean, these, we're creating a situation that, the 60 pluses won't have a whole lot of time to deal with the consequences, more or less, than the younger generations that we have. And there was very few respondents in in those age groups that are going to be dealing with the ramifications of our actions for a very long time.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. So I'm just writing what y'all are saying in the chat. Some youth voices from Aaron. Let's see, Zachary, who do you want to dig into more?
And I don't think I'm in a position to make suggestions when I haven't been able to really review stuff much, so I don't have anything to add at this point.
No worries. We can always follow up over email as well. Let's see. Next person is Patricia.
I've lost track of the question. What was it?
So essentially, looking at this first run through of the survey results,
Right.
who
What should we dig into?
Yeah.
Oh, I think we have to hear from, hopefully, maybe we could aim for something that, numbers that more reflect our actual population. And then I guess that would include folks who are not Caucasian, folks who I would also say folks who actually have to rely on public transportation for their transportation, and I think that's another group that we need to hear from. And then did I say folks with disabilities? Yeah, that would be the other group. And I think folks with disabilities do include the elderly. Not myself, luckily so far. But I was a little surprised at the comment about the elderly. I agree that we need to be, we need to make more of an effort to meet our, to make the participants look a little more like the population. And I don't know what the numbers are for elders, but I'm pretty sure that they are often the ones that, you know, have the time and wherewithal to do these kinds of things. So that's sort of the double-sided coin there. Good news, we do a lot of volunteering. The bad news is we tend to be overrepresented in things like elections and things.
Thank you, Patricia, and thank you for everyone who's also naming power dynamics as we go through this. I'm going to ask Anna if there are folks you want to dig into more.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think youth is definitely underrepresented. Youth, including kids. Yeah. And then, I mean, I definitely made some suggestions over the summer because I do think there are a lot of folks who live in supported housing, senior housing, folks who don't drive anymore, who are disabled, many of them in the Rainier Valley. And I would love to see those groups engaged with on this. And I don't think that happened. And I think those are, you know, folks who probably don't have access to Lake Washington Boulevard currently. And it would be wonderful to have some visioning about what that could look like if you know, access was an option. So in whatever way that took. Yeah. So hoping that could be, I know that's new engagement, both those, but I think it's missing.
Thank you. Let's see, we have Clara next.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add that hasn't already been mentioned, but I do just want to make a comment that for people who rely on public transit to get around, Lake Washington Boulevard is not easy to get to. And so it's probably very likely that that population might not access Lake Washington Boulevard as much as everyone else. And that may or may not be made better by making the street more accessible. I mean, you can take the 50, but there's still that really steep, really dramatic hill to get down. So depending on your mobility, it may or may not really be an option for you. And the 50 is sort of hard to connect to from a lot of the cities anyway.
Okay. All right. So no new kind of avatars or demographics to dig into. All right. Okay. Perfect. So then next we'll see Teresa. I believe you are next on the list.
I agree with a lot of what Yuan said about the data and Pat. I do agree that we need youth, disabled, and less white Caucasian input. But I'm wondering is that we talked about having another listening session, possible listening session. And if it's possible, perhaps we could focus on getting some more of those type of population included. That's it.
Okay, well, two things. One, no, this is the end of the community outreach and research for this phase. Again, there will be another phase of this project. And so we're gonna make sure that in that y'all's recommendations and considerations for next time would be put into that. And two, I just wanna make sure that we're clarifying, like right now, the lists that we're making are not to exclude people from the survey results or answers, but we're trying to just make some specific list of who we can like zone in on and get some additional or insight and really look at their answers. So the list that y'all are making are not to exclude folks, but to just, when we analyze the data, go a little bit deeper into specific demographics instead of just this blanket raw data.
Right, and I said that wrong, so I didn't mean it just that
No
way.
worries, no worries, Teresa.
Yeah.
I figured. I just wanted to make sure, since it's being recorded, that it's clear. Okay,
Right.
perfect. Thank you so much, Teresa. So let's go to Ty next.
I don't have any new avatars to add. Thank you.
All right, y'all. Okay, well then that concludes this meeting. I wrote in the chat that our next 2 meetings will be January 11th and January 25th, again from 4 to 6 p.m. We'll be sure to get you all calendar invites. I would say keep a lookout in the next few weeks for just kind of these questions again in a Google Doc form in case there's other things you all want to add or come to mind. And then Ching also put in the chat that we're going to get this cleaned up for you all as well. So we just kind of wanted to use this meeting to go through initial reactions. And then next meeting, we'll be able to look at these deeper dives as well as the qualitative data as well. And the listening session feedback and the intercept surveys. And then our last meeting on January 25th is when we'll actually make those recommendations that will go into the final report. So we are almost to the end. You all have put in a lot of great work. Really excited to see where this ends. If y'all have any questions or follow-up comments, of course, feel free to send an email to myself and staff. And we will not be seeing each other before the end of the year. So I really hope everybody has a safe, happy end of the year, and really looking forward to seeing folks in the new year and finishing up this process.